Okay, so what we have here is a basic plot chart, and let me get a good pen. And this plot chart has what we have is a basic plot chart, and the plot charts has our rising action, main beats. And what I've done is I'm just using Little Red Riding Hood as my template. So I start out, Grandma is sick, so she needs Red to bring food to her. First big thing that happens on the way to Grandma's house is Red encounters the woodcutter. I like to have the woodcutter be sort of a gruff, grumpy, sort of a boomer character who scolds her a little bit. That sets her up for the next scene where she encounters a very friendly, concerned wolf, because the wolf, of course, only has the best intentions for Little Red Riding Hood. After their encounter on the trail, he finds out where she's going. She continues on, finally makes her way to Grandma's house, and that's where our main climatic conflict comes in, the big scene where Little Red Riding Hood is questioning Grandma about her big eyes, big teeth, all of that fun stuff. And it ends like the first Rocky Balboa movie with the good guy losing. Spoiler alert. She gets eaten by the wolf. But lo and behold, the next beat, we have the woodcutter shows up knowing something was off and frees Little Red Riding Hood and Grandma, and they live happily ever after. Now, if we're going to go in and use detailed dialogue and vivid description in order to tell a dynamic story and engage our reader, this little fairy tale would end up being a pretty bulky endeavor. We don't want to type pages and pages or write pages and pages of a fairy tale. What we want to do is take the parts that are important and feature those and just kind of zip through the rest. Think of it as like a bird flying over the land. When he's flying high up from that bird's eye view, everything below is just sort of general. You're not seeing any detail, you're not hearing any conversations, you're just seeing the big things happen. And then there are places where that bird needs to swoop down and really zoom in and give us the details of what's going on, what the specific sounds are, the smells, how people feel, what the actual conversations are that they're having. So what I want to do is those are the key scenes where we zoom in and we give detailed dialogue description. So I want to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 possible scenes and reduce it. And in order to do that, I'm going to start with the one that I have to have, which for me is arriving in the cabin. So I'm going to put a circle there. And then I need to decide what else I'm going to have. So this is a little tricky in the story. Usually I don't try to put two of them right next to each other. But in this case, maybe I circle this one. Okay? Which is where she encounters the wolf on the trail. That way I have both wolf encounters featured. So the problem is, if I'm only going to go in and write scenes for these two, what happens to this information? What happens? How does my audience find out that Grandma is sick? Red needs to bring her food. How does my audience find out that she encounters this woodcutter who scolds her? Because they need to know that so that when he shows up again, it makes sense. The way that I do this is I use exposition, which is information that the audience needs to know. Usually it comes out of dialogue between characters. For instance, right here, I'm going to have Little Red Riding Hood encounter this friendly wolf. She's going to be upset. He's going to want to know why she's upset. Well, she's going to explain to him through dialogue. She's upset because she just ran into the woodcutter who scolded her for being out by herself in these dangerous woods. That gives a friendly wolf an opportunity to show off you know, how charming and friendly he really is. He's going to assuage her fears. He's going to make her feel, calm her down, and maybe convince her that the woods really aren't very dangerous at all. She's going to be just fine. He's going to talk to her and find out where she's going, and that sets us up for the next scene. So by using exposition, we've been able to get rid of the encounter with the woodcutter. Little Red Riding Hood is just going to tell us about that encounter when she's talking to the big bad wolf. Well, doesn't the wolf want to know where she's going in the first place and why? That covers Grandma is sick, so she's bringing her food. Same conversation, she's going to do both things. So we're using exposition here, which is information that the audience needs to know, revealed through dialogue, through conversation between our characters. And now we've already cut out a big chunk of our story. We could actually begin our story right here with a girl walking down the trail. She's a little upset and she comes across a wolf. So we've already saved a lot of time. So we have our climatic scene. In this case, the question is, do we get rid of this? The woodcutter arrives and frees Red and Grandma. I'm going to tell you what you could do and then another option. So this, we're looking at cutting out something that hasn't happened yet. What if I ended my story? This is a little extreme, but what if I end my story with Red arrives, she gets eaten? Okay, so fade to black when she's inside the wolf's mouth and he closes his mouth. End of the story. How is the audience going to know that things are really going to be okay? That the woodcutter is going to arrive and save her? There are a couple things that could happen. One would be foreshadowing, which is when you provide hints of what's going to happen in the future. So maybe when she's describing the woodcutter, she specifically describes his shiny axe that he's carrying around. He's got this axe because he goes around and cuts down trees. And then maybe I can bring that back as foreshadowing. Maybe right when the wolf's mouth is closing on Little Red Riding Hood, she hears the crash of the window, the glass breaking, and sees the gleam of an axe. And then fade to black. That gives the audience a chance to infer that, oh, it's the woodcutter with his axe. He's coming, he's going to save her. So that allows your audience to participate in your story, which makes it more dynamic and interesting for them. And it could prevent you from having to write detailed description and dialogue for that one scene. Now, to be honest with you, in this case, I probably wouldn't do that because this scene is adjacent to this one, and to be honest, it takes place in the same place and not really much after this. It's really part of the same scene. Once I break down these plot points into scenes, a scene tends to be one location where something happens, one point in time. So this actually is part of this scene. I wouldn't separate it right after she gets eaten, not have the woodcutter come in. So in this case, I would actually include this with dialogue, detailed description. I'd probably have the woodcutter come in and save. But it might be more interesting, you decide. Is it more interesting to let the audience figure it out based on that clue? The other thing you can do, if you don't have, if it's not something exposition is going to take care of, you could have visual clues to show what's already happened. For instance, let's say you have a story and there's a battlefield, and instead of showing the whole battle, you just have characters arrive in the village soon after the battle has ended. So you might have some description of there's still some carnage left on the battlefield. There are crows, flocks of crows picking at the remains. There might be a couple of village scavengers scavenging through, looking for armor, looking for any sort of valuable tokens that soldiers may have had on them. You might have villagers that are trying to care for the bodies of the fallen. You might have family members out in the field grieving the loss of somebody who's recently died in that battle. You don't have to show the whole battle. You can just have clues so people can see, based on the setting, the details you give, what has gone down, what has happened, what has transpired. And just clues in general. You might have, how do you let people know or let your audience participate in a mystery? You put some scuff marks on the floor. Maybe that's where a piece of furniture was moved. Why would people move that piece of furniture? Maybe they had to step up on something to get into the attic. So you could give your audience clues about things, so that when the character does come in, your Sherlock Holmes, and he breaks everything down, the attentive audience members have already figured out what he's about to tell them, which is satisfying for them. He's going to explain how the criminal scooted the dresser over, stood up on it, and placed the item in the ceiling tile. So just visual clues is another good way. And that kind of, we covered foreshadowing. You leave clues. Letting people know what's going to happen in the future. You might have clues to previous events, like the battlefield. And then anything left, anything that you still feel like needs to be connected, or you need to give a little bit more service to, falls into narration. That's where you narrate. That's where you come in with one or two sentences to sum up a lot of action. I might have a story where somebody has recently died and everyone's sad, and I might put in a sentence that says, after her death, we traveled on through the forest for 3 days, hardly speaking to one another. We just covered 3 days of action. We don't know about every squirrel chirping and barking and all the ins and outs of what's happening in that forest.